You're good to proceed, Mr. Foster.
Thank you. We'll call this meeting of the Actuarial Committee to order, and we'll ask for the opening statement, please.
Okay. This is a special meeting of the County Employees Retirement System Board of Trustees Actuarial Committee. This meeting is being broadcast via video teleconference pursuant to KRS 61826 and may be viewed by the public at the Kentucky Public Pensions Authority offices located at 1260 Louisville Road in Frankfort, Kentucky. It's also being broadcast to the public live via Facebook. If you are speaking and not appearing by video, please identify yourself before talking. If the video or audio broadcast is interrupted, we will attempt to reestablish a connection. Connection cannot be reestablished within 30 minutes. The meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled to a later date.
All right, thank you. Roll call, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. Foster,
Here.
Dr. Carver,
Here.
Mr. Cheatham,
Here.
Dr. Hackbart,
Here.
and Mr. Webb.
Here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's my understanding we have no public comment at this time.
That is correct.
All right, we'll proceed ahead then. We have a set of minutes before us of the previous meeting on May the 7th of this year. Are there any amendments or corrections to the minutes? And seeing none, I'll be glad to entertain a motion to approve those minutes as presented.
I'll make a motion minutes be approved as presented.
I will second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All in favor of approving of those minutes by motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the minutes are approved unanimously. Next on our agenda is the draft actuarial evaluation. And Danny or Jane, do you want to present that, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Foster, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to see you virtually, and many of you for the first time in October in person. At that time, we were wrapping up the valuations. There were still some calculations we were finalizing. We've since finalized those and provided draft reports in your handout material, other information that's useful, in what-if scenarios, projections, sensitivities, and then also the presentation you see here, which summarizes some of that information that's further back in your committee material. So this morning, or this afternoon, I guess Christy will be going through the first part of the discussion, and then I'll pick up with the second half. And of course, if you have any questions, you're welcome to raise those as they come up.
All right, thank you, Danny. I will get us started. So today we are coming to you to talk about the results of your June 30, 2025 actuarial valuation. So it's really important to remember that as we're discussing these results, it is really a snapshot of the condition of the plan as of that point in time. So it's your membership data and your assets as of that one point in time, June 30, 2025. As of this year, we did see a small change in your plan provisions for the insurance benefits. So those are going to be incorporated in these results, and we'll discuss a little bit about how that impacted your results moving forward. And then in kind of this first part, as we're going through those results, some of the main results that are probably of most interest to you all will be those required contribution rates that will come out of this valuation, which will be the contribution requirements that are set effective July 1, 2026. So for that fiscal year ending 2027 year contributions. So as we jump ahead, we're going to start out by just discussing what we saw primarily in your active membership year over year. As you all are probably aware, and it's been a discussion over the last couple of years, we have been seeing these increases in your active membership as well as in that payroll. So you can see on this chart here, we again saw another year of the active membership counts going up in both of the hazardous and non-hazardous funds. Along with that, we saw significant payroll growth yet again. The payroll growth comes to us in two pieces. So that first piece is directly related to the increase in membership headcount. So as we have more people in the plan, there's of course more people to pay, and therefore the payroll is going to increase. On the other side of that, you do have your continuing active members, so the members who were active in the plan last year and continue to be so this year, did receive increases in their payroll as well that were a bit higher than we expected. So we did see that experience to continue across both funds. A little later on, Danny will go a bit more into what we've been seeing as a trend over time on this particular piece of your data. So moving forward, we're going to look at what your investment experience was over the year. So we saw really favorable investment returns across all of the funds. So all of the funds received over an 11% return on their market value of assets. There is some variance in there depending on the fund across your hazardous, non-hazardous, and your pension and your insurance. But all funds did receive that return above 11%, and we're comparing that to our 6.5% investment return assumption. So that results in an asset gain, and that was in the asset amount of 901 million across all funds, greater than what we expected. However, when we're looking at this long-term commitment we have to our fund and we're thinking about our decision making, and particularly when we're talking about setting those contribution rates, we don't want those contribution rates to be changing up and down year to year with the volatility of investment returns. So we tend to use what we consider our actuarial value of assets, or a smoothed value of assets, where we're only going to recognize a portion of your gains. And on the other side, if we were to have had investment returns less than expected, we'd only be immediately recognizing a portion of those losses in the year. So this year we did recognize about 630 million in asset gains across all of the funds. And this translates to approximately a 10% return on your actuarial value of assets. So again, a really strong, really favorable experience on your investments, both on that market value side as well as your actuarial value side. With that, we are still deferring some gains into the future that will help to decrease that future pressure on your contribution requirements moving forward. On to our next slide. We just wanted to highlight that plan provision change that happened during the year. So this piece of legislation specifically impacted the insurance funds. So Senate Bill 10 was passed, which did increase that insurance dollar subsidy to $40 for our non-hazardous service and $50 for the hazardous service for all those non-Medicare retirees that fall under a certain service threshold. So this doesn't apply to everyone, but it does apply to the portion of your membership that fell under the service requirements that were set in this legislation. In addition to that, we did see an increase in the member contribution rate that was part of this legislation for our hazardous members. So the hazardous members that were contributing at 1% will now be contributing at 2%. In addition to that increase for our hazardous members, there was an additional change to our contribution requirements due to this legislation for both the non-hazardous and hazardous members, where the members who were hired after July 1, 2003, but prior to September 1, 2008 were previously not contributing for the health insurance benefits will now be contributing at the level of their fund. So the non-hazardous members at that 1% rate, while the hazardous members will be contributing at that 2% rate. Since this was an increase in benefits, we did see that impact the plan in the form of about 252 million in a liability increase across both of those insurance funds. With that, we did see some other liability experience. So on our I'm going to skip to just the insurance side since we're already talking about the insurance. So on our second bullet here, the insurance fund liability experience, I don't think this should come as much of a surprise. I think a lot of us know that premiums have been increasing, and they increased quite significantly much more than we expected, both for non-Medicare and Medicare rates. And this resulted in a $545 million loss across both of those insurance funds combined. So that was a pretty significant liability loss on that insurance fund side. Along with that, we did slightly adjust our forward-looking trends for this premium experience and increased some of our short-term expectations for those premiums moving forward. And so some of that experience is also being included here. On the retirement side, this is, again, hopefully not a huge surprise to anyone. We did see another year of some losses. So that was about $221 million across both funds. And this was primarily attributable to those larger than expected salary increases. So we know that we've been in a period of high inflation, some catch-up pay, and we're continuing to see the impact of that coming through on our liability experience, since our benefits are paid on a basis of our salary. So with higher pay, we're expecting those higher future benefits, resulting in higher liabilities for the plan. On the other side, we will see that that higher salary also does lend itself to directly allowing for higher contributions into the plan, since you do contribute on a basis of pay. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about those salary increases immediately impacting that liability, but we are also seeing those additional contributions coming in. So on to our next slide. What does that mean for perhaps the figure that you're all looking for? And that is, what is going to be that required employer contribution rate? So these rates that we're seeing in the 2025 valuation are those that are expected to be set for that fiscal year ending 2027 contribution rates. You will see for the pension fund, we are seeing as a percentage of pay, this is our required employer contribution rate as our percentage of pay. This is net of any employee contributions. So keeping that in mind, this is specifically just that employer contribution piece. For the pension fund, the favorable investment experience did offset those liability losses due to the salary increases. And that resulted in lowering our unfunded liability more than we had expected, which also resulted in bringing down that amortization cost for the unfunded liability. And here, especially, you're seeing the impact. On our next slide, we will also look at the contributions as a dollar amount, but just to lead us into that, these amounts are as a percentage of pay. So with that increased payroll, we are also seeing that decrease in the contribution rate as a percentage of pay due to that increase in payroll as well. On the insurance side, we actually saw that the impact of both the legislation that was passed as well as those increased premiums did lead to an increase in the contribution requirement for the insurance funds. As a reminder, when we're looking at this contribution, it does come with multiple parts that are included in our contribution rate. And one is the amortization of our unfunded liability. So when our unfunded liability increased for the insurance fund due to those factors this year, that portion of the contribution rate increased as well. On the other side, we do have the normal cost rate, which is going to be the cost for the membership accruing this year of benefits. So we want to make sure that we are funding the benefits as they're being accrued. And with that legislation that passed, we increased benefits for the insurance funds, and therefore that cost to accrue that year of benefit also increased. So there were two pieces to that increase on the insurance fund contribution this year. But overall, for both funds, on our non-hazardous and our hazardous side, we're seeing overall a decrease of over 1% in our actuarial determined contribution rate, or that required contribution, year over year for both funds as a percentage of payroll. On our next slide, we're really looking at the same information again, but now we're looking at as an actual dollar amount instead of as a percentage of payroll. So we can see that for the non-hazardous fund, overall, the amount of that contribution, that dollar amount, did decrease primarily due to that really favorable investment experience. On the other side, you can see that the C hazardous plan on the pension fund, we actually did see a slight increase as a dollar amount for that contribution amount, even though we saw it decrease as a percentage of pay, and that's really due to the fact that we did see that those large increases in pay. So you can see how that interaction works for your contribution rate here. Overall, we can see the impact is very similar. The contribution rate for the non-hazardous plan did decrease slightly as a dollar amount, whereas on the hazardous side, we are seeing a slight increase in dollar amount for that contribution rate. I will pause there really quickly just to see if there were any questions related to the contributions.
Okay.
Mr. Webb has his hand raised.
Yes, sir.
Not about the contribution specifically, but with respect to the payroll assumption, payroll growth assumption, the relationship between the liability and the contributions. I think we had a pretty good discussion about this in our last meeting, but want to better understand. Would it be fair to say that whether you miss one way or another because you gain or lose in contributions and offset gain or loss in the liabilities, is that more or less a wash? Or from a planning perspective, as we're thinking about where to set these assumptions, is it better to err on one side or the other?
Yeah, it's a fair question. The payroll growth assumption itself doesn't impact the liability. So if you were to change, and we can go through this later on, we'll actually show this and what it means. But on the payroll growth assumption, it's only reflective in terms of how you finance your unfunded liability. And so you collect contributions on payroll. How do you expect that payroll to change going forward? And then you back into, or you derive into an amortization cost that builds in that expectation of what you think payroll will change going forward. Um, so that you think of financing a house, you make level payments each year. What if you went to your banker, said, well, I expect my payroll to, or my personal income to go up by 2% a year. I want to keep my payments structured as a constant percentage of my changing pay, future expected pay. And and that's how this pension plan is currently financed for CRS. 2% increasing pay. In terms of, are you better off, or where's the risk lie? There's definitely much more risk for CRS to overshoot the payroll growth assumption than to overshoot. It was part of the material we discussed during the impact forum, but it becomes noticeably very important for not to overshoot or overestimate the payroll growth if you have an underfunded plan and have long amortization periods. When I say long, over 20 years. Once you become a fully funded plan or nearly fully funded, this payroll growth assumption really becomes mute because your amortization cost is really immaterial.
Thank you.
We do have more information, which we will actually go into. We can cover about this assumption.
Yes, I will. In that case, if there aren't any other questions, I do just have one more slide before I pass it to Danny, where he will get a little bit more into some of that payroll growth and such. So this slide really isn't presenting a whole lot of new information. It's just showing us, we've talked about what we saw over the year in terms of our asset experience as well as our liability experience. And the culmination is, how is that impacting our unfunded liability here? So we can see on the pension fund that we had a decrease in that unfunded liability. And that's because the investment experience did offset those liability losses. Pardon me. Same with on the other side. I'm so sorry. On the insurance side, the favorable investment experience was not quite enough in order to offset our premium experience as well as that experience from the legislation. So it did lead to an increase in our unfunded liability on the insurance side. So overall, both funds, we did see a slight increase in that unfunded liability as a total across pension and insurance. So not huge, but really the majority of that is due to that premium as well as that legislative experience on our insurance funds.
Thank you, Christy. You finished strong there.
Mr.
Yeah,
Cheatham has a question.
yes, sir.
Yeah, just to back up a little bit of this, I'm asking for so that some of the newer trustees can understand. I don't know that we touched on, probably ought to ask a question during our training to explain that that 5-year smoothing that we do. And my
Yes.
question in this case specifically is, we've had at least 2 or 3 really good years in a row now. How, is that additional return that we're spreading out over the 5 years, was that part of that 545 million, or is that 545 million just, I'm sorry, not five, I'm sorry, 901 million? Is that entirely from this year?
So
That,
the
oh, sorry.
go ahead, Christy.
Oh, I was going to say that is the 901 million is from the market value of
Well,
assets. So that would be entirely this year's. That's not what we recognized this year. So if we went back up to that slide, what was actually recognized this year is going to be that 630 million. And that being recognized does include some of those prior gains from the other years that we were talking about as well. It's page 9, slide
That
4.
answers my
Yeah.
question.
And
You may want to, and everybody may understand it, be on top of it, but the 5-year smoothing, why it's there and what the effect of it is in both up and down markets.
yeah, this. I'm glad you led into this, Mr. Cheatham. Thank you, because it's going to be a talking point on the unfunded liability there on that's shown on slide 14. When you see liability losses like salary increases, and then the change in the insurance, either benefit changes or changes in premium, that shows up immediately in the liability side and on the unfunded. On the actuarial value, as Lyle noted, in terms of calculating contribution rates, typically it's the assets the most volatile part, and as they were this last year, except there was upside risk, upside benefit to the fund this year because of the last 2 years for that matter, because of favorable returns compared to what's assumed. But it's because it is so volatile, we incorporate additional smoothing mechanism to dampen that volatility in determining contribution rates, and that is gains and losses are recognized at the rate of 20% over the next 5 years, or over the current year and over the next 5 years. So where we're at now, or where Mr. Cheatham's leaning to, and if you look at our cost calculations, which we'll show and we'll get to, they're based on an actuarial value, which is about, I think I want to say it's about 5% lower, or it's less than the market value right now. So either those gains will be recognized going forward, or if FY26 or 27 turns out to be an unfavorable year, those gains and losses will offset each other, and just dampens the year-to-year volatility in the contribution rate due to market value experience. As you know, there's certain days that the market, can unexpectedly change pretty radically. And it would be unfortunate if that, happened that last week of June, which, it actually, if you look at historically, it's happened more often than not. Just certain disturbances in June for whatever reason. But yeah, that's the purpose of the 5-year smoothing. And why we show it and why we emphasize on an actuarial value basis when we're looking at funding contributions and developing funding costs. All right, if we go forward to the next slide, kind of we're going to look at some more historical and projection information. This is historical to kind of discuss where we've been with the pension plan and where we're going to go going forward. So 2007, 2019 in particular, there were declines, changes in economic assumptions, demographic assumptions. A lot of tough decisions are made that increased and it had a material impact on future employer contribution requirements. There was also a phase in for 3 or 4 years of the contribution requirements because of those changes to an actuarial determined rate. We're at that point, we're past the phase in period and we're seeing the benefits of that now. Whereas in the last 3 years in particular, as contribution efforts have gone up, it's having an impact on the funded ratio of the plans too. We go to the next slide, look at membership count, how it's changed over the years. Again, we're back to positive experience on membership count. This will be more driven on demographic needs, hiring needs of the workforce for the employers in CRS. So hopefully that continues to be favorable for them. We go to the next slide where we looked at counts. If we look at actual payroll, and this is where, I think what we're seeing here is really an anomaly. It's in my 25 plus years of doing actuarial work, I have yet to see payroll increases like this at this level. So I do want to emphasize that while we've seen this in the last 4 years, I don't think it would be prudent to extrapolate this out over the next 5 years. I think there's going to be more dampening. We hear more and more about budgets being much tighter now, and I think it's going to reflect in terms of payroll changes. We go to the next slide. Active and retiree membership count. We can actually project this out steadily going forward because we know who the retirees are, not just current retirees, but your active members who are going to move into retirement. So just by law of large numbers, you can expect this to trend forward as you see now at that probably. So this would be an example of something where you saw the last 3 or 4 years in counts, and it would be safe to assume it's going to continue at this rate going forward, just because it's a much more known quantity that we can estimate.
Mr. Cheatham has his hand raised.
Yes, sir.
Really quick question. I know Mike, I think you all give us this number and you may already have it somewhere in the presentation. That increase in payroll, can you give us just a quick percentage? How much of that's coming from increased head count versus how much of it's coming from increased wage rates?
I think just from looking at it, it's going to come more from individual salary increases for continuing members than from new members. Keep in mind, most new members come in at a lower than average salary than the current average members. And if you look at the number of active count of being a little less than 2% for the non-has, 2.5% for the has, it really comes down. If you want just a back of the envelope guess, and this is my guess, not Christy or Janie's, I'll take sole ownership. We're probably talking about anywhere from 65 to 75% of that increased membership being probably, my guess, attributable to current members, increase for current members.
Mr. Cheatham, were you also asking about Mike Lamb's interpretation?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. The numbers that I present quarterly so they're not actuarial numbers, and the head counts that I pull are really worse than back of the envelope, to be honest with you. We take the contribution reports that come in and the active employees that were reported on those reports for that quarter. And so sometimes that may change, right? It may change by 2,000 one year to year or 1,000, and the active headcount increase that's here in the GRS report, I think on the slide before that, only shows like an 1,800 person increase. And that's looking at, the active members from an actuarial standpoint. And I think there's some calculations that go on and maybe some movement of various, maybe some active members that died and whatnot in the GRS analysis. And my numbers is really just raw data, comparing contribution reports to contribution reports. And my number is really, I would not call it a perfect estimate by no means. And I would rely more on the GRS numbers in that analysis for sure.
Yeah, I haven't seen Mr. Lamb's data, whether they polled, but what I suspect by what he described is when we talk about active membership count, it's a certain snapshot date, June 30, 2025, in this particular instance. So if you're pulling a report that says how many members contributed during a quarter or during a month, that's going to be much higher, because you've got members who are hired that may have contributed, people that contributed during a particular quarter but may not be active at the quarter end. People may come and go. I think it's just turnover or such. So if you're just, the difference may be who contributed during the year versus who was actually active at the end of the year, with that being, my guess, the most likely difference.
Reason why I ask, and I think Steve can probably give us a better feel than anybody on here. I wouldn't disagree with you, Danny, with regard to increased headcount payroll, but I do suspect that we're going to continue to see, instead of 2% cost of living adjustments for existing employees, you're going to see a higher cost of living adjustment going forward for the next few years based on what's going on in the economy.
Okay, well, time will tell. Time will tell and probably show we're both wrong. Everybody's wrong. So, no, I respect your opinion there, Mr. Cheatham, on that insight. And we'll see how things evolve. We can go through our projections. So we talked about slide 22. Oh, wait a minute. Let's back up one before we go to projections. Just numerically, just on the completeness, if you want to see all the moving parts, and how the ultimate rate is developed for an employer, you have the normal cost rate for pension and insurance. The total cost of benefits accrued, the members pay for a portion of that. And so you end up with a net employer normal cost rate. We include in an adjustment for administrative expenses that are expected to occur during FY 2026. And that's based on last year's actual expenses and divided by payroll. And then we have an amortization cost, which is based on the funding policy and statute and with the payroll growth assumption adopted by the CERS board. And so you get a rate for pension and insurance. You combine them, that's your total employer rate. And again, if you look at, you can see the funded status, unfunded liability, funded ratios for both non-HAS and HAS pension and insurance, and how it changed from the prior year. Now we go to slide 22, projections. First, we'll just cover our document, the assumptions used in this forecast or this projection, and that is all future returns are going to be exactly 6.5%. Employers make the contribution, the actual determined contribution each year, and part of that is the assumed change in membership payroll going forward. So we go to the next slide. We look at the CRS non-HAS. The top part shows the balance sheet, the unfunded liability funded ratio, how it changes. In the bottom in green, it shows the contribution dollars. So What you'll note is by far the unfunded liability sits on pension rather than insurance. You can see how the unfunded liability, it really steps down fairly rapidly the first next few years through 2018, and that's due to because of the deferred investment gains. So we're not assuming any future new gains or losses on a market value, but we know we have deferred investment gains yet to be recognized, and so you can see where the effect of that largely as it moves through the first few years. And then after that, it's really driven, that decrease and that trajectory of the decrease is driven by your funding policy and the amortizations layers. If you look through at the contribution dollars itself, so the contribution dollars are expected to be relatively stable. You see the contribution rate go down. Again, there's that instance of recognizing existing deferred gains over the next 3-4 years. And then you start to see an increase after 2043. That's 20-year amortizations come up. New layers are, of course, are going to go in. And so when we're looking at anything beyond 2043, no, that's going to change over time as new gains and losses are factored into that amortization cost. Insurance is pretty small, so we're going to skip over that. If we go the hazardous projection, so it's similar effect, just different magnitude on what's projected to occur in terms of the unfunded liability and contribution dollars. And if you were to look a bit at this last year and compare last year to this year, it's really the similar story, especially with regard to pension. I know we had good experience on investments and the liability insurance, but that's much smaller. But the message itself hasn't materially changed from last year. So with that, the next slide, we got a couple of closing comments, and then there's a few other comments I want to call out. But in terms of our prepared comments, we had favorable investment experience that was offset. You saw the impact of changes of both pension and insurance. Things. The unfunded liability continues to decrease for the pension fund. That's a big gain for us, our focus, because it doesn't have the inherent volatility in medical premiums, so benefits are known with greater certainty. Although, the moving emphasis there tends to be more on salary. And it's imperative that while funding continues to improve, I think the current funding policy in place and the assumption in place are working as appropriate and in the favor of the system. And I think there continues, there's tailwinds, it's moving in the right direction, the way it's going, and we'd recommend to keep it on that path. Now, to answer a few questions that come up for members, Sherry, if you go to slide 27, we got some sensitivity information built in. And if you go down to a few slides, for the non-haz slide 30, changes in the discount, what does that change in terms of the retirement insurance benefits and what it would do on a combined basis? If you go down a little bit, a little further, you can see how it changes the contribution rate. Again, a plus or minus one change in the interest rate assumption is big and it has a big effect. If you want to estimate what happens in between there, if you change, somewhere in between 5.5, 6.5, you can linearly and interpolate between the two to get a good benchmark idea. We have the same information for inflation on the next slide. And if we go to slide 32, we have what's the impact on the payroll growth assumption? So if we go down again, you'll notice that the actuarial accrued liability doesn't change whether you're using the current 2%, 1, or 3. And it doesn't change the funded ratio, but how it impacts the actuarial determined rate. and it's here. And again, I'd remind for those, this is just a high level summary. I would, if you're more curious about this and on the impact, I would go back to the KPPA impact forum presentation that and the section about payroll growth that Janie covered during that session gives a lot more detail and shows you, really highlights the risk of, let's say you increase it from 2 to 3, but you actually get to, and how you're going to be in a worse place than if you stayed at 2 all along. The next, if you go to slide 36, Sherry, we showed you projection information in terms of graphs and charts. Everything in the graphs and charts you can find here, actually numerically valued. So those who are more interested in the tables and the charts, that information's in your packet. They're separate for non-HAS retirement insurance, HAS retirement insurance. And then if you go to slide 47 in your packet, you actually have your the detailed report. So with that, we'll open up to any questions you may have. Last comment, while everything's marked draft, we don't expect any numbers to change. It's just marked draft pending board approval. Mr. Foster, we'll turn it back to you.
Okay, if there are no further questions about the report, is there a motion to accept the report?
Make that motion, Mr. Chair.
Accept the report. I think the numbers look really good. I think everybody's done a great job. Appreciate Danny, you and your folks, all the work you all put into it. And again, happy to make a motion to accept it and recommend it to the full board.
We have a motion to accept the report. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second it.
And my comment is a very detailed amount of information, but also very, very beneficial for us to review, I think, on a regular basis. If there's no other questions, is there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All in favor of moving to accept the evaluation report, please say aye.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? Seeing none, the report is accepted. I have nothing else on my agenda for today. Does anybody have any questions or comments in addition to what we've already discussed? All right, then, very good. We will, I guess we are at the point in this meeting to accept the motion to adjourn.
I'll move, Mr. Chair.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I heard a motion. Thank you. Okay, then all in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, we now stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.